Hollywood cinema is in a terrible state. Whether it's the over-bloated production costs, the clear lack of talent in the writer's room, or the absolutely abysmal box office showing of some of the biggest franchises in media, there's very little that we can talk about positively in the modern Hollywood system. So now, it's time to talk about Fantastic Four First Steps.
My granny called, she said, Travis, you work too hard, don't worry, you forget about me.
The first family in comic book history is now in theaters once again, officially kickstarting the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I've seen a lot of contention online between this film and James Gunn's Superman, which came out earlier this month, and I have to wonder, is Fantastic Four really worth the hype? That's what we'll be discussing today, and we're gonna do it a bit different from our last movie discussion. First, I'll be outlining the aspects that I liked about this film, then I'll be outlining the aspects that I hate about this film, while keeping it as spoiler-free as possible. In my Superman review, I went linearly through the plot and detailed a lot of things. It came out to about 35 minutes. I spent 8 total hours editing, meticulously choosing clips for the perfect bits of commentary, selecting only promotional material, and of course, it was demonetized. So instead, we're gonna have a mostly face-to-face discussion, and I'll cut in some clips from the trailers or maybe some stills when I feel like it's really important.
Hey buddy, eyes up here.
I'll start by saying, and you can quote me on this, I like Fantastic Four First Steps. It's above average on the Marvel Cinematic scale. And this holds true even if I start picking it apart, because I think this movie, much like James Gunn's Superman, is more than a sum of its parts. It's better than any individual piece of the whole. It's a movie, damn it! I can still like the whole thing while being annoyed at certain bits. Now, one of the things I like about this movie, definitely one of its strongest suits, is the visual aesthetic. Everything from the clothing to the environment, the technology. Retrofuturism is cool, and I'm tired of pretending that it isn't. This movie also has a montage-y kind of documentary style editing to it that helps to breeze the story along and tell the origins of the Fantastic Four without, you know, doing a 20-minute extended rocket launch scene. We save that for later in the film. And at the same time, the colors are very bright, everything's mostly shot during the day, the colors are very deep and saturated, and it gives the movie a striking visual flair. And the cast fit very well into this environment, and I really enjoyed the cast actually, a lot more than I thought I would. Human Torch was probably my favorite in this movie, Joseph Quin, just because he had so much material to chew on, and he actually really embodied the character. He put forward a part of Johnny Storm that we never really see, and that's him as an intelligent person. We always got to consider that all 4 of the Fantastic Four were astronauts, so presumably they're really good at math, engineering, you know, everything you need to do to qualify for a scientific PhD to get into space. The Thing was also played pretty well, but unfortunately didn't have much material. This movie was about an hour and 55 minutes, not even the 2-hour mark, and I think this is probably a studio mandate coming down from the top, because we saw something similar with Superman, which I think was under 2 hours 10 minutes. The call has come from on high to shorten your freaking superhero films, and it might actually be affecting the quality. We'll discuss that a bit later. The final 2 were Vanessa Kirby and Pedro Pascal, and while I didn't like them as much as Human Torch or The Thing, the writing definitely endeared me to them. Vanessa Kirby did a lot better than I thought, and Pedro Pascal kind of had a quiet psycho thing going on to him, sort of hinting at the more negative parts of Reed Richards' personality, his egotism. And truthfully, I don't know if that was in the script, because I'm of the personal opinion that Pedro Pascal is always acting. It could just be that, much like Patrick Bateman, what we see on the surface of Pedro Pascal is but a mask, a veneer to the true psychotic lying inside. I'll show you my conspiracy board on that later. Getting back to the runtime, this was a blessing and a curse, because the story was pretty straightforward. There was no extra fat on this, and it led to less characterization than I would have liked, but it also meant that this movie worked as a standalone, and I'm happy to say that the leaks are not how this movie worked out. There were some leaks, maybe even fake, that showed that Galactus would destroy this world, and that's how the Fantastic Four would end up in the mainline MCU. And I gotta say, it's not really a spoiler, but this movie does not force the Fantastic Four off their planet. Their planet still exists at the conclusion of the story. And if you think that's a spoiler for a superhero film made for kids, boy, do I got some news for you. The overall hero writing was good. I don't really mean on an individual level. The team was played as noble, positive, iconic. The entire world in the context of this movie knew who they were, and they had changed the entire world for the better by the time we get there. for as a viewer. There was definitely a lot of love in this production, and I actually want to refer to a video that Loserfruit did where she played Marvel Rivals with the Fantastic Four cast, and I just found it funny how enamored Vanessa Kirby was with Invisible Woman, like thinking, I'm literally this girl. I do gotta give her credit for her method acting. She literally got pregnant after playing a pregnant lady, so give her the Academy Award, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about the love in the production, it's really there, not just in the small bits, but visually. They recreate classic comic book covers for scenes. You got Reed Richards fighting the monkeys, you have the Mole Men as an actual political entity underground that interact with Sue Storm. You have their flying car, and of course Herbie the robot, which we hadn't seen in most modern renditions of the Fantastic Four. Even Galactus, though he starts out as a big, incomprehensible monstrosity, at some point they bait him to become a smaller form and he goes purple for no real particular reason but to please the audience. The movie also ended with a quote from Jack Kirby, one of the creators of the Fantastic Four, and I found that very nice. Essentially saying that in every character you will find the writer, and in fact they placed this movie in the 1960s, specifically the same year that the first issue of Fantastic Four released in our universe. Does that make our Earth Marvel canon? You be the judge. In so many ways, Fantastic Four First Steps was like a Phase 1 Marvel movie, rather than a post-Endgame Marvel movie, which makes it a return to form. Now, it's not like the best versions of the MCU, like Iron Man or Captain America, which are really just period pieces with a superhero skin on top of them. This is definitively a superhero film, but it's a good superhero film. And a pretty good sci-fi film as well. Now that I've gobbled Fantastic Four's glizzy long enough, let's get into the things that I dislike about this movie, and it mostly relates to the action. And in fact, there wasn't much action in this movie, and whatever action there was pretty basic. The most interesting displays of power are legitimately in the trailer. You've pretty much already seen the best bits. So there's no real wow moments outside of the end or a couple of parts at the very beginning montage. And that's kind of an aspect of this too. Some of the weirdest displays of their powers happen at the beginning of the movie. And if you play Marvel Rivals like I do, one of the only true wow moments in this movie was added to that game about a week before it released. So I'd already been interacting with this moment, making clips about it on TikTok, and just run it into the ground. On top of that, the action scenes felt pretty sparse in terms of visual and sound effects. They were kind of edited in a slow manner that actually decreased the tension of these moments, and in one part in particular, there wasn't a lot of different colors. There was like a very small color palette, and I have to compare it to a Superman movie, because they're essentially the same scene. Without getting into too much, it involves a black hole, but the Superman version of the black hole is much more colorful, much more intriguing, much more exciting, and the soundtrack on that moment is very, very good. Though I'm not saying that the action was bad in Fantastic Four, it left a bit to be desired. Now, I put the simplicity of the movie as a bonus, but I have to put the runtime as a negative. There are definitely some scenes that got cut in here. There's some weird lines, some odd characterizations. They don't take some conversations as far as I think they should have, particularly with Reed Richards' character development. Like, there's a line where I think he should have said something more in solidarity with the Thing, and he just doesn't. He kind of brushes him off. And overall, there's not enough material for the Thing, though I guess when the Marvel producers were looking back at the history of Fantastic Four movies, the Michael Chiklis version actually had a pretty big storyline in his films. So I guess they figured they didn't really have to do much with him here except tease at things to come in the future. There's also some cheesy lines with Sue Storm, aka the Invisible Woman, and I guess the MCU still lives on in a zombie form. Now, it's definitely not enough to kill the movie, and it works in line with her character being a new mother, and honestly, Invisible Woman is a very underrated character from the comics. I feel like people think she's a lot more simple than she is when they're on the outside looking in at comic books. She's very complex, she leads Reed Richards down bad paths, she's kind of a temptress, and she's definitely the most powerful of them. I mean, when you really think about it, you have a rock, a fire guy, and a stretchy guy, and then a girl who could essentially crush the world at max power. The Fantastic Four really solves their problems with teamwork, technology, and often calling in other heroes to help them out. Now we're gonna get into spoilers a bit early because related to the MCU, we have a scene involving the Silver Surfer, spoiler, making a self-sacrifice. And this is one of those scenes that people had taken from early cam rips and were totally mischaracterizing. Over the course of this film, Human Torch Torch is deciphering the language of the Silver Surfer and actually manages to find her origin planet, her history. They find the cosmic trail and see all the planets that the Silver Surfer has been to. And the nuance of the Silver Surfer is that the Silver Surfer helps Galactus find planets to consume. But in doing so, she protects her own planet from being consumed. Galactus is really just a primordial force, and he does have consciousness, but it's like very in the back. He is driven by his hunger, and without a Silver Surfer, he would just go and consume whatever planet he wanted, and they would have no warning. That's the important part. The Silver Surfer giving a warning is purely the thing they do on their own. They decided to do that. So understand that the Silver Surfer is inherently a good character. Throughout the movie, Human Torch develops a relationship with the Silver Surfer. They have a few conversations. He flirts with her a bit. So what really happens at the end is that Human Torch is going to make a final desperate play to force Galactus into their plan. And Silver Surfer comes in, knocks him out of the way, and sacrifices herself instead. Now, I'm not just going to classify this as MCU because I think that's what everyone was doing with this moment out of context. Just because it's a woman doesn't mean it's like a feminist iconic moment. Though the choosing of a female as the Silver Surfer probably had some of that in it, the moment itself had very good writing to it, it had a lot of precedent, and it was ultimately a kind of satisfying conclusion to the character. Now I want to discuss some points about superhero films in general, and particularly the two films that released in July of 2025, Superman and Fantastic Four, because so much of the structure of these films is exactly the same, and it leads me to believe that there is some script stealing going on between these two production studios. And there's going to be heavy spoilers here because I'm going to do some direct plot examples, and direct plot example, black hole action scene. Both Superman and Fantastic Four had a black hole action scene where they have to surf a proton river and throw their enemy into the middle of the black hole. I find that a bit too coincidental given that James Gunn literally worked at Marvel Studios. And in fact, it felt a bit more out of place in the Superman movie because context for that, Lex Luthor has to create a literal pocket universe for this to occur. Meaning he somehow has technology beyond the Fantastic Four in their film? Kinda weird. Both films also start in the middle, with these superhero teams having been established for 3 years in Superman's case and 4 years in Fantastic Four's case, and I imagine they just changed that number to 4 just to match the memes, right?
My granny called, she said, Travis, you work too hard, don't worry, you forget about me.
Both of these movies have a retro-future aesthetic. They're both brightly saturated, a lot of action scenes in the daytime, and they're both about positive themes. Really out of nowhere, these superhero films have turned from negative to positive. And while in Superman's case it's more about kindness, and in Fantastic Four's case it's more about family, they both cross over with those themes. There was also an odd attempt by Kevin Feige to foment some sort of Barbenheimer effect. I remember there was some news story about him directly calling out how people should see these movies back to back, and honestly I think you probably should see these movies back to back if you can see them on like a discount Tuesday or something. Both Superman and Fantastic Four benefit from being seen in the theaters, and I think you do a disservice to yourself if you don't at least try to catch them in theaters. But at the end of the day, I think releasing them both in the same month was a huge misplay because neither of these films are going to get close to $1 billion. And I legitimately think Superman had the potential to do that, but its box office was cut short literally 2 weeks after its release by Fantastic Four, and it forces viewers to make a choice when they're already kind of choosing to not go to theaters in the first place. It's one of those paralysis by analysis deals where if you give people too many options or they feel like they gotta do homework, they're just not gonna participate. In Superman's case, it's already made like $550 million in 3 weeks. If you left it in a theater for 3 months, I guarantee you it would at least tip $800 million. But they're not gonna do that. Unfortunately, both of these films will probably end up on streaming services about a month after their release, and if there's something that's killing theater, it's definitely these studios putting their movies on streaming as fast as they possibly can. Full reveal, I was a big fan of Barbie, and I remember the pain of waiting for Barbie to come to streaming services. It took literally 6 months for it to become available on HBO Max. Sure, you could pay $30 to purchase it, or you could pay $10 to rent it, but I'm talking about making it available to the average streaming viewer. If you don't make your movie seem like an event, people aren't gonna treat them like an event. Chicken jockey, anyone?
Chicken jockey!
If Fantastic Four is a sign of the general direction of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then I'm definitely a fan. However, superhero films are notorious for the inconsistency of production. Just because Fantastic Four was good, just because Superman was good, it doesn't mean that the next films in these series will be good, because they're made with plans. They're meant to introduce heroes, storylines, and future films. But it's the themes I really vibe with. Superhero films should be about family and kindness and helping people for the sake of helping them, not government corruption, racism, and overboiled Jesus allegory. Strangely, we seem to be entering the deep-fried era of superhero cinema, and I think it might be a bit too weird and outlandish for the casual audience. It's ironic how straightforward Thanos was in comparison. Grounded, really. The themes of that storyline were love, loss, friendship, family, taking care of the future, very relatable things to the average person. The current MCU and the new DCU are going to require you to accept multiverses, aliens, magic, demons, alternate timelines, and any number of otherworldly godlike beings. James Gunn has been very open that some of his films will be taking place in pocket universes, essentially his excuse for not having to tie them back into a greater lore. And I think it's kind of crazy that when you want to make a film about a singular character nowadays, you actually have to justify it to these production studios. Kind of weird. As an actual comic book fan, I think it's pretty cool that this stuff is even making it to the big screen, and I'm very interested to see how far they go with it. Check out this long video I did about Superman where I go deep into the plot, the production, and the future of the DC universe, because I think it's really worth discussing James Gunn's Superman in depth. I firmly believe it's going to have a dramatic influence on the culture of superhero films for the next 10 to 15 years, much how James Gunn revolutionized the Guardians of the Galaxy and made Marvel's cosmic even possible in theaters. He's solidifying the themes and style that we will be using for the future of superhero cinema. And it's kind of crazy how James Gunn is a master of writing these blueprints. Like and subscribe. I'll catch you guys there.